Let's start off with some skein basics. So the standard embroidery floss is comprised of 6 strands that can be either used as a whole or separated. So a skein of embroidery floss generally comes in a looped fashion, banded at the top and the bottom. A good length to work with is about an arm's length, or 12 to 18 inches. Say our pattern calls for 2 strands. And to do so, we will need to separate the strands lightly, and we can do so with our fingernail until these strands start to sort of separate at the tip. Once we have these separated, we can pull 1 strand out. To make sure it doesn't get tangled as we pull, I'm actually going to hold lightly to the remaining threads. And so now we have 1 strand and then the remaining 5 strands on here. I'm going to do it another time so I have 2 strands. Now that we have our threads, now we can actually thread our needle. So you want to make sure that you don't have any frayed edges, and you want all the strands to be even. And so now that that is trimmed, they're even. And this is totally up to you, but you can give those tips a little lick so they lie just a little bit flatter. And now I'm going to show you a foolproof hack of threading your needle. First, we're going to flatten these strands between our 2 fingers. And we're only going to allow just the smallest little tip of strands to show through. Now I'm going to take the eye of my needle and align it with the threads. And essentially the action that I'll be doing is pushing the eye of the needle through my fingers so that the strands also go through the eye of the needle. I have my eye of my needle, I have my strands pushed together. I'm gonna wiggle it through. And then, ta-da! This method works with 1 strand, 2 strands. I've even done it with 12 strands. It's like a foolproof way of threading your needle hassle-free. Okay, so once we have our needle threaded, you can just leave a tail that's about like 3 inches long. And then we have our remaining length right here. There are 2 basic methods of starting and finishing your stitches. The first section is the knotless method, which is a method that functions by weaving in the ends of our thread. So to start your stitch with this method, we're actually going to begin with the threaded needle, which we do have. With a threaded needle, bring your needle up through the fabric at the start of your line. Make sure that you are holding the needle around the tail so that you don't lose your tail. With our first stitch, we're going to keep pulling it through until we get 3-inch tail on the back end. Hold on to it, and then you can begin stitching as usual. After you get a couple stitches in, you won't have to hold the tail any longer. So we'll just have a free end right here. Now to finish our stitch with the knotless method, we're actually going to turn our fabric over and we're going to weave in underneath our previous stitches about 3 or 4 times. And then once that's secure, we can trim. Now we still have the beginning that we need to weave in, so we're going to rethread this portion. Right now I'm just trimming off the ends so that the ends are even, and I'm going to rethread my needle. Now we'll do the same thing here. Just going to go under about 3 or 4 stitches. and then we can trim off the end. And so this is how we can stitch using the knotless method. The second method of starting and finishing your stitches is with the knotted method, which this method functions by knotting your thread and your stitches. So after you have already threaded your needle, we're actually going to place a knot at the end of our strands. One method I like to use actually is called a quilter's knot. And so a quilter's knot, you have your threaded needle and you have your tail of your working thread in hand. You're going to want to place your needle underneath the tail of your working thread, and you're just going to place them like an X with the working thread on top. You're going to pinch the working thread, that little X, with your finger. And then with the working thread, you're going to wrap around the needle. I'm going to do 3 times. So we should see them wrapped on the needle. And then I'm going to pinch that within my fingers. Now I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to slide it through. Keep my fingers pinched, keep them pinched until we feel that thread go taut. And then voila, we have a knot. Because we have a knot at the end of our thread, we can honestly just get to stitching. We don't have to worry about what happens at the back because our knot keeps our thread in the top. So I'm just going to stitch until I don't have any more thread. So now I've gotten to a point where I don't have much thread left, and so now the knotted method of finishing our strand is that we just need to go under 1 stitch. And I'm going to slightly pull through. I'm not going to pull all the way thread through. And I'm going to go back in with my needle through this little loop that we have, and I'm going to pull my thread. And that will create a little loop on the strands. And I like to do 2. To secure that. And then now that's secured, we can just trim off. Oops.